So microaggressions really are kind of these daily indignities, right, that happen either in conversation. They can be intentional or unintentional. They can come from a place of true ignorance or curiosity, or a place of just intentional kind of bias. Microaggressions are those things that are really heaped in, at the core, it's a stereotype about a particular group of people, and a person is saying or doing something that is aggressive. It's called a microaggression, though, because it's kind of like that person who just kind of pokes you a little bit, like but they keep poking you and it bothers you. One poke is okay, but when it continues to happen, that's what it is. Or that person that does this and says, I'm not touching you, but they're in your space. It's those kinds of things. So for those of us who are one of the few, whether one of the few females or one of the few people of color in these spaces, it happens more often than not. Right? I can't tell you how many times over, my 20+ year career that people have said, well, we've diversified our department. We've diversified or let's ask Monica because she should, right? And while I might know more than some of my non-Hispanic coworkers, I don't know everything. And it's not fair to ask me to know everything, or that I give you my personal opinion and you use that as a professional, right, opinion and draw a conclusion based on that. I would never ask, right, a white man to speak for all white men. Even though all of us, according to our identity, have some similar kinds of experiences, that doesn't mean that one person can speak for a whole group. And so, yeah, microaggressions happen on a daily basis. But some of the ways that you can stop a microaggression in the moment, right, is to call attention to it. Now, my personality is to call attention to it in ways that aren't going to escalate the situation. And so, one of the trainings that I did, people say, ouch. And so a person says to me, if I closed my eyes, I wouldn't have known you were Black. I would have thought you were a white woman. In that moment, I could say, ouch. Or I could ask them to clarify what they mean. Well, I don't understand what you mean. How does my voices have colors? Help me to understand that, right? So I can ask those kinds of questions, but my tone of voice and the way that I put the question, it puts that person on notice that perhaps there's been a faux pas, right? Or I've reacted differently than you expected me to. And hopefully, right, that opens up the conversation. And that person can say, oh, I didn't quite mean it that way, or, ooh, I didn't, or they could just say, oops, sorry, and walk away. But it calls attention to that. And my hope is always that people will want to learn more. They'll want to know, right, that they've made a mistake and what can I do differently. And quite often that does lead to another conversation down the road. But I believe that sometimes the most we can do in a moment is plant a seed or interrupt a conversation. All too often when we talk about diversity, we talk about reducing a standard. It has nothing to do with reducing a standard. We have academic recovery programs, we have legacy recovery programs for people who are second and third generation college students whose parents are maybe, and I'm saying we colleges, not just Augustana, but for people whose parents have been, students here, right? We have legacy admits and maybe look a little bit differently. Colleges have legacy admits and look a little bit differently at applications of students whose parents and grandparents have come here. We look differently at applications for athletes than we do for other groups of students. But as soon as there is a student of color who's first gen who didn't make the mark on an SAT, but otherwise has very strong grades and strong social, and academic co-curricular activities, we say, well, we're not sure if they're going to be able to do the work. Well, that athlete that's allowed to have a lower SAT score, according to NCAA rules, we're not looking at that person differently. And the question really is, do we have the supports so that every student who wants to be here, we can help them to make it here? That's what we've got to really think about. And so I just, this whole idea around standards and reducing standards to get certain people in the school has always challenged me, because we are all born with similar capabilities. What we really need are the opportunities to be able to grow and to nurture and to strengthen those abilities. And that's really what creating access is all about.